Okay, I think we can kick off now. So good morning, everyone, and welcome to this webinar on mapping river and lake restoration priorities using the Priority Habitats portal. I'm Lucy Butler. I'm part of the CaBA technical support team, and I'm very pleased to welcome today Ruth Hall, who's a standing waters specialist from Natural England, and Dave Gunnell from Cartographer, who are going to be presenting the webinar today. So just a couple of very quick housekeeping points before we start. We are recording the webinar today, so we'll make that available via the CaBA website over the next few days, and we'll be pausing for questions at a few opportunities throughout the webinar. So if you do have any questions that you'd like to ask Ruth and Dave, please pop them in the Q&A function that you should find at the bottom of your screen, and we'll hopefully have time to go through as many of those as we can. So I'll now hand you over to Ruth to get started on the webinar. Thanks, Ruth.
Thanks, Lucy. Yes, so we're really talking to you today about the mapping of river and lake restoration priorities, and that's because that's the thing that we're really concerned and interested to do as part of the catchment pages for the river basin management plans. But this work all links together also with the other work we're doing on priority habitats, and as such, I'll just tell you a little bit about that at the end. But all of this work is on the, you can access via the Priority Habitats website, and I put that down at the bottom. And it's the FBA who hosts that website for us and are doing a lot of work. So as I've shown, this is a project both with the FBA, with Cartographer, and Dave will talk to you a bit about the data portal, which is Cartographer, and equally we're obviously working with CaBA to get these restoration priorities mapped. Okay, so what is all this about? Well, it's about meeting our biodiversity objectives, and as such, it's based on the premise that naturally functioning ecosystems meet all of species requirements, and consequently it's those naturally functioning systems that we need to restore so that they can do just that, so they can support all of our species. It's important to be clear about what natural functioning means, because yeah, it can be a bit confusing. So to start with, we split it into 4 components. There's the water chemistry, and if it's naturally functioning, it's not going to be impacted by pollution. The second one is the physical habitat, and by that we mean that the habitats have a natural morphology and dynamic physical processes which shape those habitat mosaics. We are also saying that these sites should have a natural hydrology, and that means that they shouldn't be impacted by abstraction, diversion, effluent discharge, drainage and impoundments. And we're also talking about a natural biological assemblage as well. And by that we mean that there is a lack of invasive non-native species, but also that native biological assemblages aren't manipulated, such as fish species removals and stocking. Oh, we've got an extra picture there. So now we have the kind of overriding concept. What are the restoration priorities themselves that we're looking to map? Well, what we want to do is actually get this bottom-up picture of what the priorities are for all of the CaBA partnerships. And it should be where a local partnership would like to see action to benefit biodiversity by restoring that natural function that we've just described. It doesn't have to be a commitment by the partnership to undertake the restoration activity. And it doesn't need to be something that you already have funding for, that you're planning on doing in the next year or anything like that. It needs to be something that you would like to be seen done. But it does need to be a little bit more than a wish list, because it needs to be guided by what is practical and achievable. And that's why we're saying it's where there are opportunities to do this. And the pictures help kind of explain what we mean by that. So the top picture there is actually a picture of the outflow of Cremant water. And that could be seen as an immovable constraint, which would say, well, there's no opportunity to restore the natural hydrology there. It's used by the water company as a potable supply, and that structure is there as part of that. So in some cases, such structures and such uses will indeed be immovable constraints. But actually in this situation, they're moving with the thermal pipeline to not use this site for water, for a water source anymore. And consequently, in the long term, there is the opportunity to remove it. So we could say now that there is this opportunity here to restore that hydrology. And that illustrates the 2 points, one of where there might be something immovable, but also the other aspect that they can be long-term aspirations. Equally, to give you a more riverine example, we can see the picture of the river at the bottom, and this is a site where there is opportunities to restore the hydrology and morphology of this river. But at the same time, if instead it was surrounded by flood defences or lots of housing, for instance, that stopped the river moving from at all within its path, then that would be considered an immovable constraint. So these restoration priorities are where you can highlight where opportunities exist to restore that natural functioning to your freshwater system. So we've said it's where there's the capacity to restore natural functioning. This slide gives you a bit more detail about what we think is relevant in that it does restore natural functioning, and those measures that we think probably, well, they're not going far enough. And so these are a few examples from the physical component for rivers, but we have a table for both rivers and lakes, and it does cover all those components: the physical, the hydrological, the chemical, and the biological. So we can see here that a relevant measure would be establishing a riparian corridor of semi-natural wetland or terrestrial vegetation, whereas the non-relevant one, the one which isn't going far enough, is to fence off narrow buffer zones to intercept diffuse pollution before it reaches the channel. This doesn't mean that that won't help a bit, but if we're here recording our restoration priorities for restoring natural functioning for biodiversity, the ones on the right don't go far enough, and that is why we only need you to record where there's opportunities to do the ones in the left-hand column. I said there was also a table for lakes, and you can see the lake table is a little bit different in that we don't have this column saying these things are irrelevant, and that's because less work has been done on lakes generally, and that there's less of those kind of measures that go a little bit of the way but not all, and because generally this work hasn't really got going for lakes yet, there are a lot more measures that actually, if they just make a start, that's worth doing. So instead you have the column of relevant measures, and in there it will tell you where something is insufficient. So at the bottom here we have a narrow fenced off strip would be insufficient in this instance. But again, they're split into those 4 components: physical, hydrological, chemical and biological. And this is the information that we get you to put into the data system as well. And the data system will ask you whether there is an opportunity for restoring the physical component, and you say yes or no, or you don't know. And then it's also to help you kind of inform that, make that decision more easily. It tells you the type of actions that are relevant. So those are the ones that were in the left-hand column, and you can tick on those yes or no. And again, I've highlighted in the left-hand column here some of those early physical ones, and you can see that they relate back to the table I've just shown you. When you put this information in, eventually it goes onto the map, which will appear on the FBA webpage, and we can see that there is a stretch of river here in orange in the middle, and we can click through and see which of those options have actually been thought to be opportunities on this river. And then everybody can see those and any can use them. But Dave's going to tell you more about how the system actually works and how to put the data in a minute. So I think the next thing to think about is why you would wish to spend your time doing this. And as I said, is an opportunity to highlight where you want to undertake restoration activity. And you can put all of your plans and ideas from across your catchment partnership into one place and map it, and then use those maps for whatever purposes you would like to. One of the benefits of this system is that it's not restricted to just large rivers and lakes, which are normally covered by WFD. They include those smaller water bodies such as headwater streams and lakes as small as about 2 hectares. We're not covering ponds at this time. As I said, these can be linked through to your catchment pages, so they become part of you saying what you want to see under the river basin management plans, but they will also inform the nature recovery network as well, so saying where restoration is an opportunity. And because you get your sites on both of those things, it improves the likelihood of support through these mechanisms. For example, just as in the previous WEG funding looked to see sites that would definitely improve biodiversity, future funding schemes are likely to do the same sorts of things. And if you've got these sites on your maps, then you can illustrate that that's the case. All of the tables that I've shown you and kind of further information on exactly what and where you can get from the guidance document, which is on the Priority Habitats webpage. So all that information is there. But I think this is a good point to pause and see if there's any questions about kind of the principles behind it and the general aim of what we're trying to do before we pass over to Dave and get him to show how the data portal works and how you put the data in.
Okay, thanks for that, Ruth. That was great. We do have one question here for you, which is from Annie Thurgeland, who says, is difficulty to engage a landowner counted as an immovable constraint, or can we hope that they might change their opinion in the future and include it?
Yes, I think it's a very good question. I think that you don't have to include that as an immovable constraint. You can be somewhat optimistic. There is a part of the information which you put in the part of the form where there's space for additional information. And that's a perfect example of where you might want to put something like that. So you can say some constraints towards your action in the meantime. And I think that kind of comes under that view that actually these can be quite long-term ambitions. And yes, let's hope for a change in opinion in the long term.
Okay, if anybody else has got any questions for Ruth, please do just keep asking them in the Q&A function there. I was maybe just going to ask Ruth a question then. Can people, if they've uploaded a site, can they then go back in and edit it or change it or remove it if they found out it wasn't an opportunity? Is the system completely flexible like that?
Yes, definitely. You can go back and change things. And I think it's important to say that whilst we're kind of encouraging people to have a go at this and do this in readiness for the catchment pages for the river basin management plans, that's not the end. So we are, and obviously we realise that everybody's in the middle of a lockdown at the moment as well. So what we're thinking is really that people will be doing this for sites that they already know, and you know, the ones they know about and they care about, and they're probably going to be the partnership's priorities. But if, as you are able to go out more and think about more sites, they can still be added. This is a constantly live product, so you can continue to do that over time. So don't worry that you can't get everything on now, or that you're limited by not being able to go out and check everything out. Feel free to say that you don't know to the things that you don't know, and yeah, come back at a later date. That's absolutely fine, and change things.
Okay, thanks, Ruth. We've just got another question popped up asking what's the rationale for including headwater streams, which is great, but not ponds. Do you hope to include ponds in the future?
Yeah, ponds are something which are very close to my heart, so it's certainly not something that we're hoping to neglect. The reason for this is actually that this has been part of the work that we're doing with the FBA, and it's initially started with the stuff that I'll talk to you about later, which is the naturalness assessments and getting sites on the priority habitat map. And we only did that with the FBA because there was work already going on with the Freshwater Habitat Trust to do so for ponds. And so I'm continuing to work with the Freshwater Habitat Trust around ponds and how we work with them to improve our priority habitat maps and highlight where things need to be done. So that's definitely not something that's neglected. It's just another organisation had already done a huge amount of work and there was no need to start from scratch. But then in the end, this one's just moved a bit faster. So yes, ponds, but it will be being dealt with through the Freshwater Habitats Trust.
Great, thanks, Ruth. I think that's all the questions we've got at the moment, but I think if anybody thinks of any questions, just add them and we'll have another opportunity towards the end to ask some more. So I think now we're going to hand over to Dave to give us a demonstration of the site and how it works.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. So this one, we'll share this one. I hope this is the right one. This is the right one. Is my screen coming up? Are we good to go?
Yep, I can see your screen.
Okay, so hi everyone, my name is Dave Gunnell. I work for a company called Cartographer and we are doing part of the IT for this project. So I'm showing you now the Priority Habitats website, which Ruth has referred to before. It's priorityhabitats.org. That's this FBA manage this website, and that's the sort of the hub for this project and for naturalists and priority habitats and so on. So I'll show you how you can get access to Cartographer to record data, and then show you how you can log in and actually start recording it. So on the site here, we have a button with contribute data written on it. You can also get through this little menu up here with contribute data, and brings you to a page where you can see the three main sub-projects within priority habitats. So we're talking about river and lake naturalness, chalk rivers, and then river and lake restoration priorities. If you click on the image for this, you come to a web page about restoration priorities. There are instructions here for how to get involved. So there's a little contact us link just here where you can fill in a little form, and we can give you access to the tools you need to record this data. And once you've got access to those tools, you can click login, and you'll go to a login page and you can get started. So the tool we're using behind the scenes is Cartographer. If you've used it before, you probably used it because of Modular River Survey. And this is a sort of another application of the same platform. If you click on the login link for Cartographer, you're going to the same place as if you click the login link on Priority Habitats. So it's the same system behind the scenes. And that login form looks a little bit like this. And when you log in, you will get into a website on Cartographer that belongs to your organization, your catchment partnership. We're using a model here, which is a peer-to-peer sharing model. So it's a sort of a bottom-up approach. Every catchment partnership has the ability to record their own restoration priorities. They have a website like this one with their company name at the top left, and their own. You can have your own volunteers in here, your own data, all that kind of stuff. You can record all of your priorities, and then once you have put them through QA and approved them, they become shared. So we're right at the beginning of this project now. We've onboarded a handful of catchment partnerships in like last week, I think. And so what you're seeing here is the sort of the nascent system. It's got almost no data in it, but this is how it's going to work. So you have two menu options here on the left, which are reflected in the middle. They're surveys and surveys for lakes and rivers. And surveys are basically web forms to input data. So if we look at the river priorities, when you start out with Cartographer, you'll have an empty screen here. This bit here ends up being a list of all your priorities, but you had to add some before you can see any. So if I click add a survey here, we'll see the form for recording a priority, and it's essentially equivalent on the lakes front with just slightly different checkboxes and things. So we can put in a date. So I'll put 26th of January 2021, and I'll put 10:30. You can choose a location, and you can do that simply by clicking somewhere on a map. I'm just going to click somewhere and hope I find a river. There's one. You can either click on a map, you can put in a national grid reference down here, or there's a facility, if you just change this, to enter a GPS coordinate instead. That'll put a pin in this map, which you can put on the sort of reach or the stretch of river that you want to record as a priority. What we're also doing with this, though, is we are correlating this data against an underlying base map layer to make it easy to sort of join data sets together. And in the rivers case, that's the detailed river network. And in the lakes case, that's the CEH UK lakes layer. So what you can do here is there are spaces down the right here to put all this, stuff like watercourse name. You can just click update from map here. You can see there that little stretch of rivers got highlighted. So we've picked that up from the DRN. We've got some unique ID, which we can use to correlate against the DRN there. We've got a WFD catchment ID. This stretch of river clearly doesn't have a water body ID, but other stretches would. And that gives us all the sort of information. You could put in a local name here if you know the name of or the colloquial name of that river. And that gives us all the information we need to correlate this stretch against a base layer. So once you've got the location down, this is fine. We've got a missing field here. I'm going to choose not to enter this. This is you should enter a name, not you must enter a name. It's like a prompt, but we can ignore it if we don't know that data, or that we know that we're right and the software is wrong. And then you can record what kind of a priority you think this is. Now, as Ruth said, we're sort of roughly splitting this down into physical, hydrological, chemical, and biological naturalist components. And for each one, you can say whether you think this type of naturalist is relevant to the kind of restoration you want to do here. Again, as Ruth said, this is sort of aspirational. So, within the bounds of reality, but maybe you can look more than short term. And then you can choose different restoration techniques you might apply aspirationally to this reach. So we've given you checkboxes to allow you to quickly select some common types of restoration, but we've also given you a text field here so you can fill in another type that we've missed off the list. Having the checkboxes there makes the form a little bit faster to fill in. It helps sort of prompt you to the different things you might be looking to do, and it also allows us to look at the whole data set and sort of get a big picture about those specific techniques. But we know that we haven't got everything there, so you've got a free text field there. So you can choose for each component in naturalness whether you think that's priority or not. If you think it's not, then no checkboxes will appear. You can say you don't know, that's fine. Again, no checkboxes will appear. And if you say yes, then you can select the kinds of restoration you might want to do. Moving to the bottom of the form, there's an area to upload photographs if you want to. We're not expecting you to go into the fields for this, but if you happen to have a photograph to remind you, or you can maybe have one annotated to prompt, to show the kind of restoration you might want to do, then you can upload it and attach it here, and it will stay with the form in perpetuity. And then at the bottom here, you can record any other notes that you feel are relevant. And this is a good place to put in the stuff Ruth was mentioning about landowner approval, these other constraints that you might find in the short or medium term. So that's the whole form. For lakes, the form is identical with different checkboxes, essentially. At the bottom, you can then choose to save the form and add it to your list of priorities. And here's a little nuance of Cartographer. This is a QA process that we have. And Cartographer is primarily designed around citizen science. So the idea is you would normally have volunteers filling in these forms, and then project coordinators verifying that the data is sensible and approving them. So whenever you save a survey, you can choose this publishing status. You can say, oh, this is a draft, I'm going to go get a cup of tea, come back and finish the form later. You can mark it as complete, which essentially allows somebody to peer review it, or somebody else within your catchment partnership to verify it before you share the data with the wider world. Or you can mark it as approved. And approval is a special status that soft locks the survey form, if you like. You can always unapprove things and come back and edit them later. This is always your data. You can tweak it as necessary, but we can just say, okay, for the moment, we're going to soft lock this form. That means that we're not, that's it. Obviously my video streaming is slowing my network connection down. We are, we're happy that this is complete and we're happy to share it with the world. So this then gets added to our survey list, and this is now part of this restoration priorities data set. Now, I should probably explain what that means in the bigger picture. So I said this is a sort of a bottom-up peer-to-peer sharing system. You have your workspace on Cartographer, your private website, where you can put in as many surveys as you want. They stay private to you until you mark them as approved. Now, at this point, this is now shared with all of the other catchment partnerships who have their own websites, their own workspaces. And everybody, by default, just sees their own data, but you can just flip a switch and see the aggregated data set. So at the top of your survey list here, there's a few different options for searching and filtering. This option here allows you to include the approved surveys that other catchment partnerships have put in. Now, as I said, this is a very early stage project, so Sam here generously put in a test, or not a test survey, a real restoration priority for Cameo. Whoops, I have some error there. It's probably to do with images, which we'll sort out. But you can see what he's put in there. You can see the stretch of river. We can see where it lies in the wider scheme of things. We can see the WFD IDs and so on, and we can see all the checkboxes that he's put in. So by adding these surveys in and approving them, we're sharing them with everybody else, and we get to see what everybody else has put in. And you can download this data to Excel or CSV, and you can include other people's data or just your own. We also have some maps of the data. So here we've got just that one priority that I put in, this sort of fake one, and you can sort of color code things and so on. And you can also, by clicking on this little cog here, see somewhere down here it says filter by workspace, and we can include data from other workspaces, and there's Sam's priority as well. So all of this map data gives you a sort of a, within Cartographer, this map view just gives you a nice overview of the data, but we also take all of this stuff out and we put it into ArcGIS Online. This is something that is still being finalized at the moment, but it's going into, it will eventually make its way into the CaBA data portal. So anyone can come along, look at from this map, this sort of aggregated set of features, and incorporate that into wider projects. I'll just finish by saying that the idea of giving you your own workspace on Cartographer is to allow you to use whatever workflow you want to record these priorities. So it doesn't have to be just one or two people from your catchment partnership doing this. There's a little users list here. You can add in extra volunteers or other stakeholders and allow them to contribute priorities. You get a QA approval on those things, and so you can build up your team to build up this stuff. But I think probably I won't talk about that here, but if you request a workspace, if you want to get involved, then we can walk through that and help you get set up. So I think that's everything.
Great, thanks for that demo, Dave. There's a few questions for you. First from Fiona Bowles, she said, if the catchment partnership holds strategic level mapping for restoration reaches, such as river restoration plans or floodplain reconnection mapping, can this data be added en masse? En
masse, that's something we should talk about. So it's not a core feature of the user interface, it's not a standard feature, but it's something we can do.
Okay, thanks, Dave. So would it be best for Fiona just to get in touch with you yourself about that?
Yeah, definitely. Either by email or through the Priority Habitats website. You can sign up. You can say we have some data that we want to put in here, and we can sort that out.
Great, thanks. And there was a question on the chat from Jill Campbell who asked, can you switch between the naturalness survey input page directly to the restoration priorities page? I assume that's
Yes,
maybe if you're wanting to add
yes,
some
you can.
information on the same list.
Yes, you can. So there's probably Cartographer split into these workspaces, which are organization specific websites. So there's a way if you can have access to as many of them as you have access to, so you can flip back and forth between them. And then we can also, within your workspace, give you access to multiple tools. So a really good example would be if you're already using Cartographer for Morph, then you've already got a workspace, Morph is already there. And when we set you up for this, those menu items just get added to your existing website. So there's sort of two mechanisms there.
Okay, great, thanks. And then maybe a question for you, Ruth. How does this work overlap with the river restoration reporting that's being coordinated by Jenny Wielden at Natural England?
Okay, so Jenny's our river restoration specialist, and she specifically runs the project for SSI river restoration. And so this is obviously much wider than just our SSI rivers. So you can put information on SSI rivers in if you like, but that's not kind of the overriding purpose of this one. So I suspect what Jenny's been talking to you about is the SSI river restoration recording, and that would be what I would say the difference is. However, I do know that she also spoke a little bit about this at the River Restoration Conference. And when I say this, I mean the Cartographer thing that we're all talking about today. So she might have actually you might be thinking that she's already mentioned this to you, and in which case, yes, she has, and it's the same thing. So kind of two answers depending on quite what she's spoken to you about.
Okay, thanks, Ruth. And then Peter Taylor's asked, does it help to have ArcGIS?
Okay, so you don't need to have ArcGIS at all. The reason I'm mentioning ArcGIS, and it's ArcGIS Online specifically, is that that's the platform that backs things like the CaBA data portal and sort of Natural England's kind of publicly visible map layers. These things are all hosted on ArcGIS Online, so it's just a matter of course that I mention it. You can get map data out of Cartographer in a couple of different formats. There's CSV, which you can import into Excel and then do things manually. Then there's the KML, which is the format that Google Earth uses, and there's GeoJSON, which you can use to get data into QGIS or other GIS products. In my experience, people tend to either use ArcGIS, like the larger catchment partnerships tend to have somebody who's already using ArcGIS to do cartography, and then the other popular choice is QGIS, which is the open source free solution, and basically the same formats allow interchange between all of them. So you don't need it, but if you're using it, great. And if you're already using QGIS, don't worry.
Equally, just we still get the sites on the map, and then you still have the acknowledgement that your sites are a restoration priority, regardless of you ever going near ArcGIS yourself. Yeah,
that's a good point. Actually, I didn't show all of those approved surveys that are put into Cartographer. Are put onto the Priority Habitats website as well. So, and you can even publish a map straight from Cartographer onto your website if you want to just put your catchment partnerships data up, for example. That's a thing. So you don't need any of these GIS tools. If you just want to put the data in and just visualize the data and get a feel for the distribution, not sort of advanced spatial analysis, but just to get a feel for it, then you don't need anything. It's all sort of built in.
Okay, thanks, Dave. And then we've got another question asking if the tool and website's only for use in the UK or if it's possible to use it elsewhere in Europe.
Right. From a technical point of view, you can use these tools outside of the UK, but national grid references don't work, obviously. But you can still use GPS locations or click on a map. From the purpose of this project, I'll defer to Ruth.
We've certainly only developed it for England so far, so it wouldn't go through to the FBA webpage and form part of our maps if it was outside of that area. But yeah, I think that's if you want to develop something and use something in Europe, I'd talk to Dave. I'll pass it back.
Talk to Dave.
Okay, thanks for that. Does anyone have any other questions that you want to ask at the moment? I was maybe just going to ask Dave a question. You obviously showed how you can highlight a particular reach that you want to restore. Say your reach was a bit longer than those segments, it was like 2 or 3 segments. Yeah. Can you highlight them together and just enter the data once for that?
So not currently. What we're working on as an interim solution for that is possibly aggregating the reaches together on that base layer a bit. So essentially, rather than showing each segment of the DRN as it's recorded, is to sort of, group them into longer stretches, which give you a bit more, something a little bit sort of better scale to work with. I think this affects people with larger projects, but not so much people with smaller projects. So it's a bit of a balancing act. That's what we're working on in the short term. And then, hopefully we can get some kind of drag a box thing in the long term, but it's not on the cards yet.
Okay, thanks. And another question that's come through was, sorry if they missed it, but how do the catchment partnerships get their username and password?
Right, okay, let me just reshare my screen. That's all right. I think I just glossed over it. So on the Priority Habitats website, so I'll just go back to the home. So you're coming into contribute data, and then you've got these 3 images for these 3 projects here, and we're talking about the Restoration Priorities project. On this Restoration Priorities webpage, it's a little bit small, but here there's a link to contact the FBA directly. That is a little web form, basically leads to an email, and we will it'll put you in touch ultimately with me for the cartographer part of it, and we'll get you set up. And it's a human process, so we can discuss what the best way of setting you up is.
I think
that's the one there.
Same thing. The kind of way we envisage this happening is that there would be somebody or a couple of people who act as the coordinators within the catchment partnership, and when they get in touch with Dave, Dave will set them up their workspace, and he does it whilst you're talking to him and really quick, and yeah, beyond my IT skills. And so then you have your workspace, and then everybody else after that, because it's your workspace, you can invite people and give them access yourself within your partnership. So for instance, if you're coordinating and then you've got volunteers or whatever within the partnership who you also wish to contribute, then you can invite them, or alternatively they can get in touch with you and you give them a password.
Yeah, let's do this. So I'll just show that. So within your workspace, essentially what I would do when we're talking over email is I take down the main things about what's the name of your catchment partnership, what's your privacy policy, and things that to set you up so you're working, all of the GDPR stuff is all handled properly. That's all taken care of. But basically I'll set you up with this website, and then I go to this users tab here. This is my fake name for this fake catchment partnership, and I just invite you, and you just fill in a name. This is what you do for your volunteers. You fill in a name and an email address, and then you just choose, I would like this person to be able to record, be a surveyor for lake and river restoration priorities. You click send invitation, that sends them an email, and they, if they're already on Cartographer, then they log in immediately. If they're not, there's a little form they fill out just to put a password in and accept the terms and conditions, and they're in. So it's pretty easy. So this is the tool that I use to set you up, and then once you're set up, if you want to bring in more volunteers, that's literally all you do. You just put a name and email, and you just have to choose what you want them to be able to do. And that's so it's no more complicated than that, really.
Yeah, and kind of what the aim of that is that it just does then make it your catchment's priorities. So you can put in all this data as that you've done, that people have inputted it, and then talking to some catchment partnerships, they're then thinking at their next meeting they will look through them and say, shall we approve them all as a partnership? Are we happy that they're all our priorities? So it allows it to be a collaborative process. It doesn't, all the work doesn't land on one individual, but equally everybody has their say.
Yeah, if you're looking at if you're collecting together a list of priorities, you would have your list here would be filled with things that don't say approved on the right, they say complete or drafts, and then you can go through them one by one. You can tweak the data as necessary. You approve them, and then none of your volunteers can edit them anymore, and it's also locked down until You might want to make a change later, that's fine, but they wouldn't be able to. And then once you've approved them, then they appear on the Priority Habitats website. So yes, there's a sort of you can use this as a to-do list, if you like, to sort of, or a to-review list.
Okay, thanks. We've got a good question here from Martin Wilkes, who's asked, can you tell us a little bit more about what will be done with the data in the future? Are there any plans to predict where further opportunities might exist by looking for relationships between user contributed opportunities and landscape characteristics?
Wow, that's a good question. One which I don't have a proper answer to, I don't think. That's certainly not the plan at the moment. As I say, we have previously looked at national data sets and found that actually we can't say very much at with the national data. We need that kind of bottom-up approach, and that's why we've gone for this one. But as part of the Nature Recovery Network, there is all sorts of work around sort of, yes, a bit more trying to say what can be done to create this Nature Recovery Network, as well as kind of where the good bits are already. And this will contribute to that, but there's further work on it as well. But you know, it's only at a very early stage of thinking, so it might be that this can help lead to further predictions, or it might be that we put this in as it stands, and that's what it is, because it's our best picture.
Yeah, thanks, Ruth. And then there's a question from Jill Campbell, who says she has a workspace for the naturalness surveys. Are those also being coordinated through the Catchment partnership, or are the two survey areas handled differently?
Yeah, you're right, they're handled differently. And the feeling there was the restoration priorities, we wanted them to be the partnership's view of the opportunities within that area, whereas the naturalness assessments, we want anybody to have a go at that, and it's absolutely fine, you know, get in there and have a go. That doesn't mean we won't make use of this extra functionality going forwards, in that it might be that actually, I think I'll answer the second bit of that conversation once I've talked about the naturalness assessment. Would this be a good point to segue in, and then we'll
we've maybe just
afterwards.
Got one more question from Karen Andrews, who says, if there's sensitive sites, for example, where a landowner might be hostile to suggestions, but where they want to record the opportunity, is there any way to hide those sites so only the admins can view them?
So that's a really good question. Now, the answer is no, but. So it's not something we thought of yet for this. However, there is precedent for other cartographer users having, you know, we've got that feature for certain other applications, basically, particularly endangered wildlife type applications where you don't want to publish, possibly even to other volunteers, the locations of certain sites. So that's something we can look into. It's not impossible by any stretch of the imagination, but we don't have it right now. Probably best to chat to Ruth and Chris, and then we'll work something out.
If people had added a site, I guess, like that, and they just hadn't gone to the fully approved, you know, so they could see it in their partnership workspace, can you still see that in sort of Natural England and take that data into account through that way, or does it not come through until it's actually been approved?
So it's not, the way things are set up, no, it's private to you. So, and this is, you know, like just a design principle. If you don't approve that survey, your catchment partnership is the only organisation that can see it. What we do have is the way we've worked around this for certain for the wildlife case that I talked previously is that we have a sort of sensitive data mode where it really locks down who can see what. I'm not sure that's appropriate here, but we could certainly have a sort of sensitive flag here, something like this, rather than approved. You know, something that sort of is a halfway house. There's a question as to exactly how we do that. We'd have to think about it, but I'm keen to actually have a conversation about that. So let's let's maybe pick it up over email and see what we can do.
Thanks, Dave. So yes, Ruth, do you want to now move on to talk a little bit about the naturalness surveys?
Okay, right. Okay, can you see my screen all right? Yeah, good stuff. Okay, so I just wanted to talk a little bit about priority habitat maps and naturalness assessments whilst you're all here, really. Because obviously we've talked about why we're interested in doing the restoration priorities now for the catchment pages. But as well as knowing where we want to restore things, we obviously also want to know where the best sites are that need to be protected. And again, we've done this on a national scale with relatively coarse data sets. We've got data on the larger WFD bodies, water bodies, but what we don't have is data on the smaller water bodies and even some larger ones that aren't surveyed sufficiently. And so we realise that that's a gap, and we want to fill that, and the best way we figured of doing that was to use citizen scientists to tell us about their sites that they know about, the ones they care about. And so consequently, we have a very similar system to the restoration priorities, where you go to the freshwater, the FBA priority habitat page, and then you go to the contribute data, but you click on the naturalness assessment instead. And you get a little form, and I've just put a very small section of this form in, and this one's for the lake naturalness assessment. And just like with all the restoration priorities work, you can see it's split into the components, and I've shown you here the physical naturalness component. And you can see that it asks you for a score, and the score is 1 to 5, and it asks you for your confidence. So because this is the citizen science initiative, we do want anybody to feel that they can have a go. And if they're not particularly confident about what they're saying, it's absolutely fine. They just say that they're doing it with low confidence, and that can go through. The idea of giving a 5 class scale is quite a subjective one. We're not asking people to go out and do in-depth morph surveys or something similar. There's a series of descriptions of kind of what we think each class looks like, but it is a subjective opinion that then you think, I think it kind of fits this one best. And that's kind of what we're asking for. For lakes, for the physical naturalness component, you can see that we ask you to consider shoreline condition, riparian land, and lake morphology. And the guidance sort of helps you through that process. So this is what is in the guidance. We've got some tables, and we can see for physical naturalness, and I've only fitted on the first 3 to fit on the slide, but it gives you the kind of impression that it says shoreline condition. Is there any evidence of physical modifications of the shoreline? A marginal fringing wetland is likely, particularly in lowland lakes in this situation. Sorry, I shouldn't have clicked on it because I've shown it to you. And so you can see these kind of descriptions for each bit, and we've got one for the shoreline, for the riparian, and for the lake morphology in the same way as the form was set out. And all this is on the website at the web address down the bottom to allow you to kind of make those subjective decisions. And we have them for rivers, and we have them for all the components of naturalness as well. Why do we want people to do this one? Well, the data will be collated at intervals and used to update the priority habitat maps. And how that works is that we select those sites which are of on the most naturally functioning to go on the priority habitat maps. The priority habitats are identified as part of the UK commitment to the International Convention on Biological Diversity, and these sites are given some protection. They have to be considered in certain decision making, particularly like planning, and also a lot of the EA permits, for instance. Also, priority habitat is used to help target the funding of various environmental schemes as well, such as the agri-environment scheme. So it's worth getting your sites on the map to get that level of protection and to, again, help lever in the funding later on. The question then arises, is it worth putting on sites which you know are in poor condition? And I think I would always say yes. If it's a site that you you're interested in, a site that you're going to look at, why not? Because actually I think the process of going through the naturalness assessment actually really helps then with the restoration priorities, because you have a look at it and you think, well, what's the physical habitat like? And then if you think, oh, well, actually, it's only got a 4, you might then think, well, what can we do about that? You know, this is a site I care about. So it might then inform you to think something different about the restoration priorities. And it still gives us a national picture of the condition of the priority habitat across the UK. So it's worth doing. Once you've put your data into the naturalness assessment aspect of Cartographer, we then have the map come up on the FBA webpage, and this is an example of that. And you can see there's various coloured dots. So what we have at the moment is the white dots with the blue circles around the edge, and they are sites which are currently on the priority habitat map. And I think what this shows for lakes specifically is that there are very few sites currently on the priority habitat map, and that is because most of our lakes are in absolutely appalling condition. Also, we don't know much about the smaller ones. Since launching this function, we've been very lucky to have some volunteers get out there at times when we've been able to go and actually start using this, and they have produced the coloured blobs that you see. And it is likely that the green blobs will be the ones that will end up on the priority habitat assessment. You can look at each blob in more detail and have a look and say, and click on it and say, well, okay, which elements are actually leading to the lower score? Is it the physical, the biological, the chemical, or the biological? And there'll be a score there for each element so that you can interrogate that data. So that's what the naturalness assessments is doing, and that's the kind of product that it produces. As I said, both these projects are being implemented and hosted by the Freshwater Biological Association, and I've given you a contact there for Naomi and the web address as well. But what the FBA are currently doing is they are looking to work with, and they've initially approached a number of wildlife trusts, rivers trusts and the like, to see whether they would like to use their volunteers to go out and do some of these naturalness assessments, and in which case they can help by providing some training for them to help give them the confidence to go out and do it and the like. So that question previously about would you use that kind of setting of somebody overarching, having a look and approving, that we might decide to go down that route as we sort of work with other organisations to use their volunteers. But at the moment, it's we're just having a kind of access system where you contact the FBA, they give you access, you can then add to the national picture. You don't have to be affiliated to anybody or get approval from anybody. The QAing of the data that goes in will be based on the photographs that you can upload and also your confidence levels in your assessments. If we find some really great sites but somebody's not very sure, we might well go out and have a look ourselves to kind of make sure we're happy too. So, you know, certainly have a go. Don't feel you have to be part of a wider organisation. And those people who are kind of professional freshwater biologists or ecologists, they might find that there's a number of sites they've already visited that they feel they can happily fill the form in based on the information they have already. And certainly Chris Mainstone's been doing that for a number of his river sites that he's visited over the years. Equally, I find Google Maps really helpful for looking at lakes when I know that I haven't been in a boat and got around the entire shoreline, but I'd like to get an image of how much of that shoreline is impacted. As an indication of how much effort it takes, I have managed to do one on a day that's a National Trust property while my children are having a quick play at the play park. I've been able to go over and have a look at the lake and fill in the form relatively quickly. It's not an onerous task to do, especially if you've had a quick look at the form in advance and know what's being asked. And equally, you can just fill in parts of it. There's those components, those are the main bits that you need to put in. And then there's some extra questions which are kind of, if you know, give us the information, a bit of species recording, because we always think it's good to know that kind of information, and some further details, as I say, if you have it. But yes, that's what I wanted to tell you about that. So, any questions?
Okay, thanks for that, Ruth. There's just a question here from Karen asking if Cartographer's available as an app.
Yes and no. So it's not available as an app for this. So we have an app, and it supports most of the surveys we have on Cartographer. The reason that restoration priorities and in fact the naturalness assessment are a bit different is because they have this tying into an underlying base layer, the detailed river network or CH lakes layer. That facility is not available on the app yet. We had to solve some fun technical challenges to make that work. But modular river survey, MORPH, for example, is. So yeah, and you can get to that if you are using Cartographer. There are instructions to get how to get hold of the app on your homepage inside Cartographer.
Okay, thanks. Does anyone have any other questions about the naturalness data or anything further you'd like to ask about the restoration priorities? Please just type your question. I was maybe just going to ask you both if partnerships looking at this, you've obviously got the guidance on what would count or be suitable as a restoration priority, but if people want a bit more support or help, you know, in considering whether something is a restoration priority or identifying those sites, who can they get in touch with for that?
So I would say almost don't worry about it that much. You know, if you think it is, go with it. It's meant to reflect what partnerships want to do. But having said that, if you do want some extra help or guidance, I think in the first instance is to contact Naomi at the FBA, and we've put her contact details up there, and she's going to act almost as our sorter-outer, and then if there are more technical questions that either Chris Mainstone, our river specialist, or myself as the lake specialist can answer, she'll forward them to us. If it's a more cartography question, it'll send through to Dave. If it's something more to do with the FBA and the website, she'll deal with it. So I put Naomi's contact details up, and she can be the first port of call, but you might be directed to someone else.
From
Thanks, Ruth.
From a sort of a software support point of view, there's contact details on the Cartographer website. If you're using Cartographer, look in the footer. There's an email address and a phone number to reach us. So either I or one of my colleagues will pick it up. No problem.
Okay, that's great. And just a comment from Karen, who said, thank you for the really clear presentations, looks really useful, and definitely be exploring it further. So yes, just following on that comment, it's been a really helpful presentation from you both today, and hopefully lots more of the partnerships. I'll be taking a look at the site and adding restoration priorities. So I think that's probably about all we've got time for. So thank you everybody for your questions, and especially thank you to Ruth and Dave for your help today, and for everyone for joining. And as I mentioned earlier, we have recorded the webinar, so we'll post that up on the CaBA website in the next couple of days, so you can look back at it for a refresher on anything that you want to look back at or share with any other colleagues who you think could be interested. So thank you everyone for joining.
Thanks, Lucy, for hosting. Thanks.
Thank you.